how I got into music in the first place and wanted to be a musician. I knew from the age of 5 that I wanted to make that sound that my mother made on the piano when she sang. And it wasn't specifically the piano, it was just I wanted to make music. I didn't even know it was called music at that time. I just knew while I was bouncing on my rocking horse that I wanted to do that. I used to bounce on my rocking horse to Xavier Cugat's band playing Tico Tico and Lira Lira too, you know. And I just knew I wanted to do that, make that sound, you know. 6, 7, and 8. And then my dad sent for me from New York because he remarried. And that's another story about my stepmother. My dad didn't want any girls around. He wanted a boy. My dad was really into football, and when I got older and started getting into high school and stuff, one of my earliest memories is my dad coming home in his tennis whites, you know, and stuff. And I thought my dad was like John Wayne, you know, big, tall, handsome guy, you know. And I came home and I said, I made the tennis team. And instead of being proud of me, he got angry at me. And he said, what, you didn't go out for football? And I said, I don't know anything about football. No, I didn't go out for football. You know, and I wanted to tell him about seeing him when I was a little kid in his tennis whites, and I thought he'd be proud of me, you know. No, instead I got into an argument, and I finally said, listen, I'm not going to sit here. Because he was saying things like, you know, what are you afraid of body contact? You know, you don't like body contact for sports? Now, we had a pond that froze over in the winter where we were at that time, and I used to play ice hockey, you know, without any kind of helmets or maybe even gloves. I can't remember whether we wore gloves, but, you know, I played lacrosse as well when I got to military school, you know, but this is before I got to military school, but I played ice hockey, and he's asking me if I'm afraid of body contact. I wanted to say, well, use your brain, you know. That's a little bit of body contact, you know, plus blade contact as well, you know, and stick contact, you know. So I said, I'm not going to sit here and listen to your shit. It's the first time I ever cursed in front of him. And he just went livid. Started thumping on my head. We're sitting on the couch, and he had the football game on, you know, football. And I said, I think I got in, you never even brought a football home. How would it, you know, I don't know anything about football. I don't know the terminology, what it meant, you know. And so he gives me a thumping for it, makes me go in the room, and I climbed out my window that night about midnight and hitchhiked to the railroad station, the Long Island Railroad. And when the sun came up and the commuters started, I snuck on the train and rode into Manhattan and ran around Manhattan alone all day and the night, and went through it. I slept behind the couch in the Hotel Astor, one of the Park Avenue hotels. I snuck in, and well, the clerk wasn't there, and I slid behind this couch and slept there at night, because I had walked through from the west side to the east side through Central Park, and there were all kinds of weird people in the park at night. And so I said, I don't think I'm going to sleep up here, and I'll see what's on Park Avenue. And that's how I got behind the couch. And actually, I slipped in there, and the clerk didn't see me slip in, and the place filled up in the morning when the people started shopping and all that. I just stood out, and all of a sudden I blended right in, walked out of the lobby. And then a couple of days went by, and I called my stepmother and told her I was in New York, because she was in tears, you know. She said, I didn't hear her, she said, oh, we're so sad, we couldn't find you, we were scared. And my dad used to go away on business trips, and quote business trips, and I think he was having an affair on the side all the time, you know. Or just, who knows what he was doing. And I knew I wanted, from my mother's involvement with music, I knew I wanted to make that sound, which I later learned was called music. And then I listened to Gene Krupa. I saw early days of television. The Benny Goodman Orchestra was on, I think, and I saw Gene Krupa playing drums, who was the drummer for Benny Goodman, of course. And I said, I want to do that, you that's cool. And I was about 13, 14, 15, 16, that age there before I went off to military school. And then after that, college, I was living on this really, really nice, it was the best part of my young life. Had a beach house. My dad had gotten up higher up in the corporate ladder, and we had a beach house, and I have a bunch of beautiful teenage girlfriends are running around, and guys my age and stuff. Roy Campanella, the catcher for the Brooklyn Dodgers, bought a house there, and his sons, I befriended his son David, and he had another son I didn't really know well, but David and I and a couple other guys hung together, and there was a whole other faction of kids on the property that were the same age, boys, that were really bigots, and their parents were the same thing, they use the term, stuff like that, and I would never even use that term, especially after coming from Chicago, South Side, you don't say you're going to school with 150 in your class and they're all black, or something like that. I've inflated the number, but so I got to be friends with David Campanella, and there's these two girls that were twin sisters there, and they had a birthday party, a lawn party, barbecue kind of thing, and I went to it. My good friend at the time, his name was Robert E. Lee, and he was a big, tall guy, and I think he was the bass player in the combo, the musical pop combo that before it was called rock and roll. He was there, and there was a bunch of us that went to the party, and all of a sudden, and the girls are wearing all crinolines and skirts, and those days girls wore crinolines that came out to here, which were inflated the skirts. And for anybody that doesn't know what a crinoline is, all of a sudden we're getting bombarded with ink balloons. These beautiful crinoline skirts and dresses the girls are wearing are getting hit with, and all around us. And somebody was just from in the darkness around us. There was coming these incoming ink balloons, and ink and water mixed in balloons. And it must have been total over a period of a couple of minutes, maybe 10 or 15 of them. Loosh. A lot of them just hit the ground and broke and stuff. A lot of them hit. I didn't get any on me, but a lot of the guys, there was about 20. A lot of the people that were our age didn't even go to the party. Their parents either wouldn't let them or they didn't want to. They didn't want to go to school where there was And so when me and Robert Lee and another guy started running after the guys, we could see the guys in the shadows that were throwing the ink balloons. And so we chased after them and didn't get them, but found out who they were. They got in some light where I could see they were, and it was the guys that were really bigoted, came from bigoted families. And there was a carpool to school, and I couldn't even go because the people that drove the carpool were all bigots, So I rode my bicycle about 5 miles to school every day and back, But that was still a really good time in my life, even though that was. Also, we were hired to. There was a bulkhead because when hurricanes and heavy seas came on Long Island Sound, our houses would get splattered with water from the waves. So they embedded a 40-foot corrugated steel, bolted together, a whole row all the way up the line where all the houses were on the water, and so they would break up the water. We had several hurricanes and stuff the water got really fierce, and me and Bruce Ferris and Joey Tausch, which sounds like a Nazi name, we were hired to paint the bulkhead on the water side, because it was getting all corroded and stuff. And Joey wrote something like, and we were in front of our next door neighbor. His last name was Goldgar. I can't remember his first name, but Joey Tausch wrote with a paintbrush on it, "Dirty Jew," and left it there. And I said, hey, that's not cool, you know. And I covered it up. He wrote it again, you know. So I just left it and said the water will wash it away or something. You know, all right, I'll sneak out at night and do it, but I never did it and cover it. Meant covering it, I'll sneak out and cover it up. Because our house, we were right where I lived. I could have, in reality, if I'd have thought about it, erased it, you know, again. But I didn't. All of a sudden it became a big issue because Dirty Jew was there, and Mr. Golgar got furious and brought us all into court and everything. And I was caught up in it. My dad didn't even believe me when I told him I had nothing to do with it. I'm the one that erased the first one, you know. And but he didn't give a crap, you know. Not that that has anything to do with music or Cat Mother or anything, but I had a band, which they called, Alan Freed was the DJ that coined the term rock and roll. So I had a 3-piece pop combo. And and we actually, we got to play, I played with the guy, I can't even remember the guy on stand-up bass, but Joey Tausch was the guitar player because his mother played guitar, so he picked up the guitar from her. And so I had to associate with him for a little bit there, but we played the local Democratic convention and a few birthday parties and stuff, and then the reality of there being Nazis or Jew haters or whatever came out, and I just didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. And then and when that band was together, I was wearing what they called engineer boots. They came up to about here, and they were black, and they had a buckle that went across the top, and Levi's, and a motorcycle jacket, and I wore my hair like Elvis, and I made sure there was a little curl that came down here like that. And I used Vitalis on it so you can blow it away with a high-power fan, or a jet, stand behind a jet that would still stay shaped like that. And so my dad said, the way you're dressing, he says, I'm sending you away to a private school. He says, and I don't know if I can afford it, but you can't be sticking around here doing this kind of shit. You know, I went, what kind of shit? You know, I'm just trying to live, you know. But I didn't know how to really relate to my dad because he was a nice guy, but I mean, everybody told me how wonderful he was. I mean, I had to believe them, you know, and the guys he worked with and stuff, but and I knew him, my dad, better than they did. You know, I didn't see the side where he was always going on business trips, you know. And so I got sent to New York Military Academy because my dad thought I was becoming a juvenile delinquent. And quote unquote, I mean, that was his term, even though it was a universal term, juvenile delinquent. He categorized me into that category, you know, so away I went, and to New York Military Academy, Cornwall-on-Hudson, New York, prep school to West Point, same uniform, same regimen, pretty much. But I was lucky enough to have taught myself how to play drums, so I got a scholarship, and I was in band company. And, you know, I got to be on the drum line. And that's where I learned the 13 rudiments of drumming. Like a paradiddle is right, left, right, left, right. And the flamadiddle the flam is two together almost simultaneously, not actually sound, but that just a little bit offset, right? And then there's a flamadiddle, which is a paradiddle using flams, so it's Chuck, my college friend, we weren't actually roommates, but we were good buddies because we went to Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, which had we were there for it was a college for the performing arts, and everybody there wanted to be an actor. We put on plays and or a musician, and we did Guys and Dolls, where Chuck played the lead role that Marlon Brando did in the movie. I forget the character's name offhand, but I was in an orchestra pit playing drums, and then we did Tea House of the August Moon, and there was no music to that, and so I had a role playing an old man called Mr. Shumato or something like that, and so that I didn't get to play in that, I got to act in that, but we covered all sorts of acting things and musical things, you know, and we even got invited to the Yale Drama Festival, so we went up from Florida, about 10 of us. I don't know how we afforded it. I guess the college had a little money. And we went up to Yale and we played, I did a thing called Hello Out There by, I think it was William Saroyan. As I got older, I was oriented to the entertainment industry, basically, you know, both acting and music. Then I got out of college, and Chuck was from somewhere in middle America and never been to New York before, and I said, I grew up there, like, why don't you come with me? And I dropped out when he graduated. He was 2 years ahead of me. And I was a sophomore. I completed my sophomore year, and I said, let's go. I'm not going to stay here anymore anyway, you know. And I've learned enough. It's time for me to get into the real world, you know. And I was being a little presumptuous, I think, because that was the real world there too. But I was anxious to get to New York or Hollywood or somewhere like that, you know. Eventually I got to both. But so we went to New York. This is about the same time that this kid from Hibbing, Minnesota, came and played Gertie's Folk City. Was the first place. His name was Bob Dylan. And everybody said, you got to go hear this guy, man, can he write words? He doesn't sing too well, though, but he can put words together like you wouldn't believe, you know. So everybody started migrating towards Gertie's Folk City, and Bob Dylan's career just skyrocketed from there on, you know, even only a minute after he came from Minnesota, you know. Not literally a minute, but you know what I mean, just a fraction of time span. So I answered this ad, a guitar narrator wanted for a mime troupe. And I went down, and also my college best buddy, Chuck Morley is his name, he tried out for it first. As a matter of fact, I believe he found the ad, and he went down and didn't get hired. And so I thought, well, I'll give it a try, you know. And I said, is it okay if you're not going to feel like a competition or anything? And he said, no, hell no. So I went down and they hired me, and so they showed me what their stuff was, and I got a script of things like, for instance, Lewis Carroll's The Jabberwock was one that they did the mime version of while I narrated The Jabberwock, and then there was a couple other things that I don't recall at all. The only other one I know is the one that was written by a man named Freddie Engelberg, way back in the late 50s, early 60s. He must have written this, and I don't know who he was, never met him. But I got the script for it, and it was, I don't even know the title of it, but it was a narrative piece that was very clever, and now would now be a good time to try and repeat it.
Would you like to do it?
Recall it? Okay. Strum. In the beginning, man was insecure. And there was a minor chord that would do that, you know, which just makes it kind of an ominous sound. So to give himself, he was insecure, and so to give himself favorable odds whenever he felt he wasn't quite sure, he surrounded himself with gods. Now there were gods for everything: life, love, death, war, ping pong, I mean, everything. But the god of sweet, dreamy peace was a huge, smiling fellow who could sit staring into space, and he might say, yeah, so that really meant, yeah. Well, one day, with a rich merchant god, seeing what a terrible example Sweet Dreams was setting, cast a spell and dissolved Sweet Dreams into a foul-smelling rancid oil which he imprisoned in an ancient lamp. and there he stayed. Until the barefoot boy of Basra, one day while the sun shone red, while looking to pick up some extra bread, stole the merchant's magic lamp and fled. He fled to his pad on the outside of town, spilled out that oil and sat himself down and polished that lamp until it sparkled. And then he did what he planned to do. He went back to town and sold the merchant his own magic lamp back. And with the money he bought some yogurt, some wheat germs, some art supplies, and a string for his lute. And he went back to camp. Now when he got back to camp, what he found was truly surprising. For where the oil had been poured, a green bush was rising. Boink! And then the mime would pluck an imaginary plant and roll it into an imaginary piece of paper and go like that and roll it up and go. Now how that stuff got passed around is another story. But Sweet Dreams was back in all his glory. End of narrative. That was cool. I thought that was equal to Lewis Carroll's The Jabberwock, to have that imagination to write that. You know, just some guy, I don't know anything about him. All I know is I remember his name from long ago. His name was Freddie Engelberg, and he was from New York, and the mime troupe had that script.
Do the Jabberwock.
The Jabberwock by Lewis Carroll. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the momraths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, beware the jaws that catch, the claws that catch, beware the jub-jub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in the hand, 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Oh, come to my arms, my beamish boy. Oh, Callooh, Callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the momraths outgrabe. Brum,
Brum.
You got it? Well, he was born in Brooklyn. His name was Lionel Shepard, which I thought was a great name. But he was involved with the Bapak Suba spiritual operation or spiritual movement. And so he changed his name from Lionel, which I thought was a great name, to Richman Shepard, you know, or Richmond. And he had his ex-wife was a woman named Sykes Equine, E-Q-U-E-N, Equine. And she was from Greenwood, Mississippi, and her daddy had become sheriff of Greenwood, Mississippi, and she was sick of all that was the days of Emmett Till and she ran away from home at 15 and came to New York and met Lionel on the subway, and that's how they got together. And he had already come back from Paris because he had studied with Marcel Marceau, and he was an established mime at that already, and he married her eventually, Sykes, and then they split up, and she became single, and he remarried shortly after that, but she didn't remarry until she and I met. I just played a smattering of guitar. I was mainly a drummer, of course, and so I went and they hired me. Our audience was mostly the Borscht Belt, and we'd go up in there into all these resorts and perform, you know. Lionel had remarried to a lady named Jane, and because they're followers of Bapak Subu, whatever, she changed her name to Hadria from Jane. And they have a daughter. They had two daughters, one named Vonda, V-O-N-D-A, and I don't recall the second daughter's name. so Sykes and I got married. We actually found a minister in upstate New York and went there. It was just the minister, his wife, who played the piano, and she's playing it, and Sykes and I are walking arm in arm up to the minister standing there in this little mini church in New Paltz, New York, or something like that. And he married us, and it's the only real marriage I've had. What happened is that Sykes told me she was pregnant, and I went wonderful, and the day she was born, Rain was born in a hospital on Fifth Avenue off of Central Park. At the time that she was being, they wouldn't let husbands into the delivery room, you know. So and Chuck came along with me, you know, and so we frolicked. It was a real snowy winter day. Rain was born February 3rd, 1963, and we were over. Chuck and I were waiting. They wouldn't let us into, or me especially, into the delivery room. So we went across the street to Central Park, and we found a big old cardboard box, and the ground was covered with snow. And we found this hill, and we were playing sliding down the hill in this cardboard box like it was a sled or something, like a big frisbee or something, you know. And we'd climb the hill again and do it again. Did it as doubles, and later on after that, Sykes said she could see us from the window from the delivery room. And she was so jealous of us frolicking where we were out there. Well, I should have been inside with her while she was giving a baby. And I later explained they wouldn't let me, you know. And so she finally did understand. But we had a little schmooze over that one, you know. And the rest is history in terms of Sykes. And I mean, we stayed together for a while, but she let me go. Basically, she said, I don't want to tie you down, you know. I mean, she was just loving, you know. She said, go back to New York, because she wanted to go back to college where her sister Barbara was going up in Goddard in Vermont. And she didn't want me stuck in Vermont while she went to classes, and I took care of an infant baby, you know. And she knew that I was seeking a career. And I was 4 years younger than Sykes was, you know. And she was ready to have a baby, and I was ready for a career, and she just lovingly said, go ahead, you know. And we became really tight friends still until the day she passed. You know, I played an ambulance driver on a police show in New York. I forget even the name of the police show. But I did a few commercials. I did a commercial for Command Shaving Cream. Here's a little inside tip. I'll be quick on it. It showed me they said when you come in for the shoot, at least have a 5-day growth of your beard, you know. So I came in, and they showed me with my 5-day growth. Then they had me go off screen. They stopped the filming, and I went and used an electric razor. And this is an advertisement for Command Shaving Cream. And I used an electric razor and got really, 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 really close shave. And then I put the cream back on, and they went back to they edited so the scene was me shaking the razor blade off the shaving cream, and it was so, you know, but there was nothing but shaving cream on the razor. There was no whiskers there because they had taken them off in the interim, you know. Mm-hmm. So I did a few commercials. I did a few small parts in series. I did it also for Suzari Marionette Company, if you've ever heard of that. It's a well-known, established, I believe, in Europe. And I learned how to do marionette work, you know, and do the voices of different characters and do two marionettes at the same time and stuff like that. That's a whole nother facet of my musical ability, you know. Although I didn't play music, I hummed a few songs for with this character or that character, you know, because we had all these. I think we did The Prince and the Pauper was one of the little playlists we did. I speculated that the coming thing was a new age of rock and roll. This was just a second before the Beatles, I think, or maybe it was a second after. all I remember is that when Sykes and I were living up in the Upper West Side and I was going downtown, I'd get down to Midtown and you could hear it. So when the Beatles first came to America, and I was walking around and you could hear this roar coming from the east side of Midtown Manhattan. And it sounded like, it was like, I don't know, it was really this, and it was continual. What it turned out to be was like a mass of 2 blocks of screaming teenage girls, and the Beatles were up in the balcony of this hotel off of Park Avenue, and these girls were just going nuts. They were climbing up, practically climbing up the walls of the hotel, but they were sneaking in and trying to get up through the service elevators or the stairs or anything like that, just to get at the John, Paul, George, and Ringo. But when the Beatles hit, and I don't know if you remember when the Beatle wigs were the big thing, and everybody was, in downtown Manhattan, in the entertainment industry, like 42nd Street and Times Square, where all the theaters are and stuff like that. Every other store was a Beatle wigs stand or something. People were just capitalizing on wigs for a minute, and then that phase of it passed because the Beatles started coming up with some real legitimate, good music, that people weren't used to, like lyric-wise, both John had the most knowledge, I think, along with Paul, of musical structures and chord sequences, and it used to be that, in the 50s, those like Jerry Lee Lewis and those guys would just do 1-4-5, E A B 7th, or D C or G C D, or whatever, and they call that the 1-4-5. And most of the songs back then were like that, And the Beatles broke that chain of, they introduced, they had classical music stuff that they wrote tunes around classical chord sequences and stuff, And it became didn't take long for everybody to accept the Beatles as being really legitimate. People in the industry. Well, I was kicking around in the village, Greenwich Village, and meeting different people like John Sebastian, who later formed the Lemon Spoonful, Buzzy Linhart, who I didn't really know well, but I was kicking around there and I was playing guitar, which like Chuck, my college roommate, had a guitar, a nylon string acoustic guitar, and we started singing old Kingston Trio songs together, and Brothers Four and all that era, Peter, Paul, and Mary, and we were playing in this club called the Cyclops, which was a restored or renovated butcher shop or something like that, but it had a big floor and a lot of tables. It had been turned into a small nightclub in Greenwich Village, right across from a place called the Night Owl, where John Sebastian was putting together the Lovin' Spoonful, and I was singing with Chuck old Kingston Trio songs, and it was the turn from folk again back into rock and roll, because it went from the old rockers, like Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis and all that in the 50s. Then it went to the folk stuff for a while, the Weavers, and like I said, the Kingston Trio and all that, Peter, Paul, and Mary. So I could see across the street from the Cyclops, also on the bill, by the way, at the Cyclops, was Richie Havens. And he played with his thumb all the time, He open tune his guitar, and just he didn't know chords like an E chord or an A minor chord or something like that. He would just tune to an open tuning and use his thumb as if it were a slide, but he'd just hold it in place like that and go up like that, And his voice was incredible. His whole demeanor was incredible. And he had a sideman with him that played Krupa. And it was just the two of them on this mini stage. It was in the window of the Cyclops, so you can stand outside and watch everybody from behind, you know. And then Chuck and I went in and did our Kingston Trio songs and stuff together, and then on the breaks we'd all go out in the backyard and smoke a joint, you know, and talk about music and musicians and stuff and show business in general. But while the things were starting to happen at the Night Hall, and then the Love and Spoonful formed, and I got to know more. I didn't know John Sebastian well, but I knew of him, and we interacted, you know. But Joe Butler, the drummer, since we were both drummers, we got into a lot of talks about different drummers and stuff like that. We put together the Ginger Men by wandering, just musicians wandering around Greenwich Village and meeting each other at the Cafe Figaro, you know, where I was cooking for a while, a breakfast cook there. I started talking with these two brothers, Terry Boylan and his younger brother Boona was his nickname. I don't really even remember what his born name was, but he was just called Boona, and John. And so I met them, and then they were looking for a drummer, and Boona played bass and John played guitar, and they both sang harmonies, and they'd been singing harmonies like the Everly Brothers since they were kids, you know, so they really had tight vocals. And they were looking for a drummer, and I just said, well, I play drums too, because they thought I just played the guitar, you know, when I met them. And so I became the drummer. This woman named Susan Cusker, she wanted to be our manager of the Ginger Men. We started getting good gigs, but on the upper East Side, you know, the posh part of town, you know. And within a month and a half, we had all new equipment, you know. I had gotten this really nice leather jacket with really nice cloth, really fine cotton cloth sleeves, and we had got this whole, and then they also served food, and there was a kitchen adjacent to the stage. Like the stage was here, and the audience was out there, and to the right wall was where the kitchen was, and there was a door there with a serving window in it, you know, and they had a waitress that would get stuff from the serving window, and one day we were all tuned up. We'd been playing there for a couple of months. That's how we were able to get all new equipment. I had new, that coat was new, my drums were new, we had new amps, we had a nice new Standell. Things were starting to go out of tubes and into digital, I think, right about that time. So we had all new equipment, basically, is what I'm getting at. And I'm looking one day when we were tuning up and already tuned up, and I'm sitting there, and John and Boona can't see the kitchen because in those days the drummer was on a riser. So I look in and I see smoke and flames licking out of the serving window in the kitchen, and the door is closed, of course. And I'm going, where's the cook? You know, and I look around, and he's way up at the front, schmoozing with the bartender sitting at the bar, you know. And I see the kitchen's on fire, and here's the rub. The whole ceiling of the club is a draped, big, huge fishing net that's been hanging there for years, so it's covered with dust and all kinds of burnable, combustible debris, you know. And I realized I'm the one that's got to tell people that the club's on fire, you know. How do I do this without everybody screaming and stomping all over each other, you know? So I said, ladies and gentlemen, I have something I have to tell you. And I was already up there, and I don't even think John and Boone even knew that it was going on. And I said, we have a little problem in the kitchen. Now, I don't want anybody to panic, but the kitchen's on fire, and but there's no danger. Just quietly get up and don't stampede out the door. Just let some people go in front of you if if you're not panicking, and everybody will be safe. And when you get out the door, turn to your right and your left, get away from the front windows. And meanwhile, the flames are starting to lick out enough to maybe even reach that. If that fishing net caught fire, it would have just dropped flaming fishing net on everybody, And everybody got out, and then we're going, my drums are brand new, our sound system is brand new. My brand new coat, that I had a packet of weed in the pocket, and couldn't get to it, I couldn't get to I think we got, John and Boone got their guitar and their bass out, but all the new amps and the sound system, we bought a brand new Standell solid state amp, PA system, and it all burned to the ground. But nobody was hurt. I take it back. There was an old couple that was sleeping on the next floor. This club was on the ground floor of an apartment building. There was an older couple. I don't know. I heard just an old couple. They were suffocated in their sleep from the smoke that seeped up through the floor, and our ceiling, their floor. And I told the bartender, call the fire department right away, and everybody, please don't panic. And we had to go back. I couldn't carry it. I think I maybe got a drum pedal and an hi-hat out or something. Couldn't get. They got their guitars out, but all the new amps and everything. The whole place burned to the ground. Not the whole building, but the whole club was just gutted. So the Ginger Men got burned out, and that was the end of the Ginger Men. And so I wandered around. I had an apartment on Bleecker Street, 7 Bleecker, right off of Houston Street, where the hobos lived in doorways, and so I wandered around just trying to. I was thinking, should I get in another band and try and find people? I don't know how exactly, but just wandering around the village, talking to people and stuff, and people telling them the story about the Ginger Man, and I think I met Roy or somebody like that, and I knew him because he was walking around the village. He had been. I think it was Roy that was the first one I met, and then he knew Bob Smith, and somehow a lot of the guys that we knew there were folkies, like Charlie Chin was a guitar singer, songwriter. He lived on 8th Street, I think, and so everybody seemed to bump into each other, and the last thing they were looking for was a drummer, and then they heard about me being a drummer. We had Jay Unger with us first, and somehow Jay decided didn't want to do it anymore. I'm not sure the specifics of it, but Jay left, and we had to find another guitar player who also played violin and mandolin. And we heard about this kid in Boston whose name was Larry Packer. He did play violin and mandolin and basically played fiddle, but he did know classical violin as well, We had finally gotten everybody together in Cat Mother. We decided on the name and everything, and we decided that since we couldn't get, they were bringing all these, like Linda Ronstadt, the Stone Ponies, Frank Zappa, all these LA performers, and we couldn't get work, And so, we got very little work. So we said, let's go woodshed. Let's go find a place out of the city where we can go and be comfortable and work on the music and just do that, and take a break from performing, because we can't find work anyway, right now, because they're bringing all these bands into around New York City and the surrounding area. So we knew about this town called Woodstock, which had been since the 20s an artist colony. So he said, let's move to Woodstock, New York, and see if we can find a place to live and big enough to house everybody. And there was like 5 of us and 2 little kids. We get there, and here's this beautiful 2-story Victorian place. It's huge, and it had an old-fashioned wood-burning cook stove in it, and it had a shed with tools in it, and a shed for the wood for the stove, and it also heated the house. And plus, it had this big meadow with a freshwater stream that ran through it, you know, and at the top of it, and it was graded down. It was a big meadow too, like maybe I'm not sure how big. A couple acres, 2 acres across and 2 acres this way. A big squarish, round, ovalish type meadow, and ironically, there was a small stage there that the previous owners or renters had been doing children's theater there. So Dan Furpo became a road manager who, when we were rehearsing on Bleecker Street, who had just back from Vietnam, he took a hammer and nails and his tool belt and went out there, and in a couple of days there was a big full-size stage there. And his brother, Dan's brother, at 7 Bleecker on the ground floor, was working with this new technology called light shows, a mixture of oil and water and coloring to make light shows. And we were the first bands to carry a light show with us, you know, on the East Coast, except for the Fillmore East. They had a light show, but that was it. And they were in one spot. We were going around bringing it with us, you know. So Dan built the stage, and we knew all the talent from the village. So we started the thought process of, hey, why don't we do these big things out in this meadow, outdoor gigs, and we can, since there were no clubs up there working, you know, and we wanted to have an income, why not do this, you know? Since we were called Cat Mother and the All Night Newsboys, we started publishing, we Xeroxed, and it was the day of Xeroxing a little flyer called the All Night News, and Charlie Chin wrote a column full of similes where you use all, like Sarah Supple, it was called The Saga of Sarah Supple, sat solemnly sitting by the sea, sucking on a strawberry soda or something like that, you know. It was all, and I drew a cartoon called Crabs, and it was just a little thing, a little mound with a big curly thing coming up, and there was about 8 of them, and the diminishing in the background, and at the foot of them were these little things like this, or were like that, you know, the crabs themselves, and then captioned it like, you know, what's up, you know, and well, the top of that hair or something like that, and it looked like cactuses growing out of, if you took it in perspective and brought it down to the size of crabs, then you realize it was hairs, but image-wise, it looked like a desert scene with strange-looking cactus growing out of it. But there were little crabs there, and it was just called Crabs, you know. And it had some funny ones and some that weren't so funny. But anyway, and with Charlie Chin's Sarah Supple's had Solomon stuff, and so we'd take them down to the city and leave them in clubs and places where we played, and also record stores and stuff like that. We'd leave a stack of the all-night, it was called the All-Night News, you know, and so that kept us in touch with our fan base, you know, and so people wouldn't forget about it. Okay, the Woodstock story. We had the stage, we had the property. It was just not in New York City, you know. But it was only an hour's drive or so up the New York Thruway. They call them Thruway, not the freeway there. But anyway, there were hundreds and hundreds of people. I mean, maybe even thousands. It was gotten so big, people were into the woods already, camping out, and we put up signs about watch out for starting fires and stuff like that. And we dug a trench for an outhouse and built a, Ferbo and I put a 2x4 frame over it, and with black plastic over that, and split it between guys and gals, you know, and dug crappers and fire pits along the place that were safely, cause we had to do the fire pits because we wanted them safe, and we found stones and lined the fire pits with it and made it environmentally friendly for people to gather and spend a weekend or so, or a couple of days. It was just people were camping out in their cars, and we had to actually clear away a spot for cars to park, you know, and we asked, her name was Pan, P-A-N, like Peter Pan, Copeland, who owned the store, had the property, and we asked her if it was okay if we expanded into the woods a little bit, and of course we knew all the talent from the village, so at the end of the last one, we got off and said, you know, it's been great, and let's look forward to next summer, you know. And that's when Michael Jeffrey approached us, as he was up in Woodstock, where we were looking for a house for Jimmy, because Jimmy had been sleeping on a cot in Michael Jeffrey's office in New York City, you know, and making all this money for Michael Jeffrey's at the time. Jimmy didn't know that, and neither did we. We thought, all right, he was on the itinerary. It said 80,000 for the Jimi Hendrix Experience, 20,000 for Cat Mother. Well, that didn't happen. You know, that was just on the itinerary. You know, and that's how Michael Jeffries discovered us doing the sound nuts, because he was up in Woodstock trying to find a house for Jimmy to live in, and heard about these sound outs. And the last one that we did, where we got their final thunderous farewell to the community, and Ferbo and the crew are unloading our equipment, and this gentleman walks up, I'm sorry, that was not the right word to say about Michael Jeffries, but this male person, walks up and says, "Hello, my name is Michael Jeffrey, and I manage Jimi Hendrix. You've heard of him, ain't you?" Or something like that. And I said, "Well, I think so," you know, facetiously. And he says, "Would you be interested in touring with Jimmy and opening for Jimmy?" And what can you say to that? You know, no, I don't think so. I have a haircut scheduled for that day, you know, or something, you know. So we said, yeah, just point the way, you know, and tell us what to do, you know, because, yeah, we'd love to. He says, and then he showed us, and I turned the area. That's how I found out when we got our first list of where we're going to go and be for the next following 30 days or so. And it said, like, on Jimmy's itinerary, it said, say, this gig here, $80,000. For the Jimi Hendrix Experience, you had to come up with $80,000. For Cat Mother 2, you had to come up with $20,000. So that's $100,000 every time we played. The person who put on this arena, I mean, we're playing in places like Madison Square Garden, you know, and what do you call it, Cobo Hall in Detroit, and places similar to it in Atlanta, Georgia. And in actuality, we got $100 a week for burgers on the road, and $20,000 went into some offshore accounts in some bank on some island in some lockbox somewhere in the Caribbean. Well, I'm holding you money for, I guess we even surmised it. We didn't even ask. We just thought, this guy's our manager. He's managing a huge talent, and we just surmised that he was holding our money for us, you know, and we trusted him. That's what you get a manager for, you know, is to watch over you while you do this, because musicians are notoriously vulnerable to corrupt management, you know, and he was the aces when it comes to corrupt management. And so when I was going to add, when Jimi Hendrix died, he didn't have a bank account even open for him, nor did we. But we figured maybe Jimmy would have had, you know. But on this that came out after he died, there was no bank account, and he had a $20 bill in his pocket, or maybe 1935 cents, I don't know, something like that. And then, in bad taste, Michael Jeffries got killed in a mid-air plane crash, so nobody could even figure out, you couldn't ask him, but take him hold by the neck and say, tell me which island is the bank account on, you know. But Al Hendricks surmised that if he was going to send money, if Michael Jeffries was going to send any money, he'd send it to his family and have them bank the money for him, you know. And we're talking about tens of, hundreds of thousands of dollars probably, you know. And so he sued the estate of Michael Jeffrey, and damn if he didn't win $5 million. I saw a documentary about Woodstock on TV, and he, in it, because they were asking him what inspired you to envision this massive amount of people gathering together to listen to music. And he said, well, there was this band down in Woodstock last year or the year before, and they were doing what they called sound outs, and I can't remember, I don't think he mentioned the name Campanella, unfortunately, but anybody who was there knew what he was talking about, you know. And he said they were supposed to play here, play at the Woodstock, the one we did in Bethel, and he says, but they didn't show up, and the reason we didn't show up is because the night before, the actual Woodstock Festival, which it was on our itinerary sheet. The night before, we were doing a radio interview in Toronto, Canada, and we got up the next morning to head down to Bethel to the Woodstock Festival to play, and the thruway was closed. And so we called Michael Jeffrey, our manager, and said, hey, the thruway's closed. What should we do, you know? And he said, well, this is going to be a quote for the rest of my life. He said, you just did the New Orleans Pop Festival, and then right after that you did the Atlanta Pop Festival was first, and then New Orleans Festival after that. And he said, so what's another outdoor festival? That was his exact lines. What's another outdoor festival? Little did we know that it was the definitive outdoor festival, you know. And Michael Lang, in a documentary about Woodstock, gave us credit for inspiring him by doing our sound outs. He didn't call them sound outs, I don't think, in the documentary. There was another band called The Band, and the sort of first album was songs from the Big Pink. And that was the Big Pink House, you know. And we knew there was a band down there, but I didn't put it together, none of us put it together when they put out songs from Big Pink until we finally one day went, Big Pink must be that house, you know. And so we got to know them a little bit, and we opened for them. I think I told you that the other day at the Fillmore East. And we went on first and had to do 3 encores, or a couple anyway. And when we came off stage, Garth Hudson and what's the drummer's name?
Levon?
Levon Helm, yeah. They were standing in the wings waiting to come on. Their equipment was behind ours, and as soon as we got ours off, they pushed theirs forward. And we were coming off. We passed by. I don't know who it was. It was either one. It was one of the members, and one of them was talking to the other one. And says, I don't know how we're going to cut that one, you know, or live up to that one, or something like that. And I overheard it, and I said, listen, and I'd heard their music before, because I think they had an album out, which is why we were opening. At any rate, I said, hey, you guys got nothing to worry about, believe me. I said, you guys are exceptionally good, and one of my favorite groups of people that play music, you know, or bands, or whatever I said. You know, it was a brief encounter, just one passing by, you know. But I did hear him say, I don't know how we're going to live up to that, you know. But they got 5 encores, you know, or something. And they were so good. I thought they were just great, you know, their music. The Electric Circus was huge, actually, but that was a local club. We became the house band for the Electric Circus. It was like it was a huge eggshell. The whole ceiling was probably done with plaster or something, and you felt like you were inside an eggshell. And there was a stage in the middle, and behind the eggshell was another ramp that ran around the whole center upper part of it on the other side of the eggshell. And I guess the people that were working the projectors had to climb a ladder or something to get up there. And there were little pinholes all around, and they were projecting through those pinholes. They were projecting light, you know, movement, color, and stuff, and solid colors, and it kept moving. The whole thing was alive, and this playing. We became the house band because they liked us so much. They kept us playing and brought in more people, local people, and they had live acts that would come in on our breaks, and one of them was we took a break and then this music would start from off stage or off from behind the eggshell, and there was a little doorway that opened up, and one of the acts that came through. It was this nun who was solemnly walking towards the center stage, and like she was praying, and she got there, and all of a sudden this music came out of speakers, and she stripped off her nun's habit, and there's a stripper with a skimpy little thing on it, and she's doing all this dancing and stuff, and just blew everybody's mind who was watching, because the audience still stuck there, you know, staying while we were on our break. And then there was another act that did a trapeze over the stage while we were playing, sometimes. The opening Good Old Rock and Roll was a guitar lick. It's a simple, ageless, it's a lick that goes dun 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 dun, and you just play a chord with your pinky, you're going dun 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 dun. A real simple lick, and I said, well, I'll just do it, you know. And so I just went in there, and in the opening of Good Old Rock and Roll, you hear a guitar. It starts with dun 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 dun, boom. But again, the whole band comes in on the second bar, you know. And you can't tell because they mixed Larry's playing. They mixed me right out and brought up Larry's guitar, and that was that. And we went through the whole song with Larry playing, you know. And but I'm the guitar part in the first 2 measures of Good Old Rock and Roll. Well, actually, the tune was written in the 50s by somebody came up with the idea. Let's pay homage to the roots of rock and roll. You know, I mean, you know, all the like Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, whatever, Carl Perkins. I think Carl Perkins wrote Blue Suede Shoes, and Elvis did a cover on it. And that's the one I sang a verse of in this Good Old Rock and Roll. And we just, I don't know, in conversation at a rehearsal or something, thought about, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did a back history tunes, you know, like, and made it a modern song that paid homage. I mean, we just sort of figured it out that we wanted to do the old songs, but bring them back to life for the new generation, you know, the post-Beatle generation, you know, or the Beatle generation. And I don't know, it was already written for us, really, because when I was just a little boy, the only verse that really was written for us is when I was just a little boy, my one and only joy was listening to that good old rock and roll. Now I just turned 83, and if you want to get a message to me, all you got to do is play me that good old rock and roll, and it just went, but Larry's doing, and I'm going into Chantilly Days or something. I forget what the second song was, but or the actually first song. It was our verse, and then we ended it with the same verse of ours, you know.
Right.
And out. But it was really a simple song because it was really written by everybody else. We just did the one verse. If I didn't have to do it over again, I'm thinking egotistically here, I would have done more of an Elvis impersonation when singing. I would have gone, "You can knock me down, you can step on my face." I'd have lowered the register because I sang it too high. It was not a good key for me. So I would have put a more of an Elvis inflection to it, you know. I might have even shook my hips or something like that, but it's hard to do on a drum stool. Michael Jeffrey got us the contract. Michael Jeffrey being our manager, got us to sign with Polydor. We didn't have a label. And he got us Polydor. And by contract, we were supposed to be able to pick the sequencing of our releases. And so we had this hit single, Good Old Rock and Roll, and we had been discussing what should be our second release. While we were on the road promoting ourselves in Good Old Rock and Roll, they released the record company without asking us what by contract we were supposed to be able to do is pick our second release. And they picked a song called Can You Dance to It, which was written to be difficult to dance to, thus the title, Can You Dance to It? You know, I mean, duh, you know. So here they released this song, and it didn't go up the charts at all. It went down the charts, and down the toilet and out the drain to the Hudson River, practically, you know. And we became known in the trade as a one-hit wonder. And we had a lot of good tunes that would make you not be able to not dance, you know. I mean, you couldn't stop dancing from some of the tunes that made you want to just jump up and down and dance around. And lyrically, they were much better than slug, 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 slug. You know, and people just standing on the floor going, "Can you dance to it?" "No, I can't dance to it." Every time after even the first album was released, and everybody that we knew, as the second one and the third one came out, everybody that I ever talked to said, "Man, you guys, you should be going someplace, you know. Why are you still playing this Borscht Belt, you know?" And we went, "Well, because Michael Jeffrey's stealing our money and directing us the wrong way." Paul Johnson, that's his name, and he's the first guy we met who met when we got here that had room for us to rehearse in, and we had a turning of the not the millennium, but from 1960 to 69 to 70, we had a party in his house in Albion Ridge Road going up to Albion. And the whole house, everybody in the whole house, you could feel the whole house rocking because we were upstairs in the attic. It was big enough to have a band and people dancing, but there were people dancing downstairs too. And people that were standing out on the porch, like this wasn't this house, but it was, you know, as flimsy. You could feel it. They were just telling me that you could feel the whole house going like that, no matter where you stood. And it was. Everybody was afraid the whole ceiling was going to come crashing down. But so we went from 1969 to 1970, the New Year's Eve party then. Well, I know that cabin is Rick Lane's cabin. If you read somewhere in there, it says his name is there. Yeah, he took the picture, and that's his cabin that we're sitting on, and shot through the piece of wood that John Chamberlain carved. And it was East Casper. He got the wood, piece of redwood, I don't know how thick it was, maybe an inch thick or half an inch thick or something like that, and carved it and made little firewood here and he carved that little axe and did all the painting of it, the little things, the mushrooms growing out of the ground and the rocks, they're all real. The brush. I mean, what a genius. But this cover it always has amazed me because it was The others are just painted, you know. I mean, I shouldn't say just painted. I mean, the others are beautifully, wonderfully painted. But this is carved. He actually carved that wood and then painted on it. And he carved that axe and carved the stump that the axe is embedded in, or appears to be. It's an optical illusion. And even the pieces of firewood are real firewood. They're real little slivers of wood. And the little mushrooms he carved. It's a classic in Chamberlain's work, that's for sure. It's in East Casper, somewhere. It had nothing to do with Albion.
And is that you sitting on the roof with the guitar?
That's me.
That's you with the guitar.
I think I have a beard at the moment. All that darkness isn't all beard, but... And then JC sitting on the stump. And the little beatnik out front, that's John's other person, the other half of his personality. He always has the little beatnik, he calls it.
Yeah, do you miss John?
A lot. I was really tight with him. He had a great sense of humor. Roy was a little staid, if that's the right word, like very kind of rigid. I didn't really get close to Roy. I got closer to Bob. Bob was really, he was the driving force behind the band. Jay's old lady sang with him on Last Go Around. She came to California with us. And then they all decided to go back to New York. And Fat Charlie Pritchard, we met out here by Tom Quinn introduced us to him. And Charlie drove from Austin, Texas in that Commerce Battery truck. That was his truck. The first Nick Wilson photograph. Nick calls, it was the first, he got interested in photography when we came out here, and that was his first photograph that he took. I don't think I'm really rolling a joint there. It wasn't, I think I was maybe picking my nail or something. Or, maybe I had a cuticle that I was trying to push back, or, you know. I don't think I was going to roll, just smoke a joint in front of Charlie Pritchard taking pictures. I mean, Nick Wilson taking pictures, you know. But I may have too. I'm not discounting it, you know. It was. I think I know when it was. Is when Polydor dropped us after the fourth album. They weren't, and it wasn't selling because we didn't have his follow. It really didn't. Because we didn't have a strong second single, the sales went from, I mean, we were, good old rock and roll went to 22 in the top 40, you know, all over the country, but in the Billboard top 40. I realized that we were driving from here to Eugene, Oregon for $20 a night per man, you know, or something like that. That's not literal, but it's approximate, you know. I mean, our money income was really minimal at that point, you know, and we still had albums coming out, but because we didn't have a strong single, we slid off the charts and then couldn't get another one up there, and we didn't make Woodstock, so that didn't happen, you know, and if we'd have made Woodstock, if we'd have this, if we'd have that, you know, coulda, shoulda, woulda, you know, it didn't happen. I just said, hey, band meeting, because Eve comes before Michaels and Smith, Equine comes first, I became president, Roy vice president, Bob Smith secretary treasurer. So I sort of became the spokesman, partly because I'm was a little bit more articulate and outward going. Roy was a little bit introverted, and Bob was not introverted at all, but he, like me, sometimes rambled on and didn't get to the point. And so the question was, how did I hand in my notice? I just said, hey, we're not going anywhere, you know. We're going all the way to Seattle for pennies, basically. That wasn't literally what we were getting, but that got my point across, you know. And I said, we come back here and we're having to spend money just to get gasoline. And by the time we get to Seattle and back, we've spent all the money we earned in Seattle. So why go to Seattle, you know? Why not see, you know, and we're not getting, there's no place to play around here except for Eagles Hall, and we were doing the boogies up on the ridge. And at one point we were making money, but that was only locally. You know, we were trying to stay countrywide. You know, I mean we were flying, you know, from Seattle to, I mean, from New York to New Orleans to Atlanta to back to New York and then to Philadelphia, and you know, playing those kind of size venues. You know, playing big arenas and stuff when we were with Jimmy, and then it kept shrinking down to clubs, and finally it was like driving 300 miles for burger money, you know, or just gas money, you know. All it did was just, you know, make it very difficult to get anywhere and make any money, and then the record company dropped us, so we had no more record contracts. And the reason they dropped us is because of the lack of its follow-up. We became a one-hit wonder, they call it in the industry. And then they went on as Campanella, and they went through 2 drummers. But see, the thing is that what made us really so integral, I guess is the word, is that all Bob had, with Bob signals a lot, used to signal a lot on the way he was playing. He could move his pinky, and we know what the next song was going to be. When they got a follow-up drummer, they couldn't ever get the cohesiveness that we used to have, because we could signal each other like what was, like you could tell Bob was what song he was going to go in. When we finished one song, we knew what the next song was going to be, because he would just play one chord, and we knew that's going to be Turkish Taffy, or, you know, we knew, he just, whatever, we knew what was coming up for the next, the whole time we were playing, we knew what was going to happen, and we didn't have a particular song that was going to be, we didn't have a list of tunes we were going to play. It was all the songs were in our heads, and Bob kind of was the engineer, if you use it in the sense of it being in a recording studio. He would just signal us by making one chord, and then a chord change, and we knew what the next song was going to be just by the sound of that chord change. We knew which tune it was going to be, and even in mid song, when they got a second drummer and then they got a third drummer, I mean, it took us years to get to the point that we could just look at each other and know what was going to be played next, and now, you know, or it was time to stop playing it and go to a next tune or something. You know, there's all kinds of things that would occur while we were playing that needed to be, I wish I could think of an example offhand, but basically what I'm saying is that the other drummers that they got after I left didn't know those signals, you know, and they didn't even barely knew the tunes. They just had to learn songs, you know, like overnight practically. And we had been playing together for years and years. Like, I don't know how many years we were together, but from
At that point, it was probably 6 years or 7 years.
the Stone Ponies and Campanella were playing on the same bill, and we were sleeping on the floor. Campanella was sleeping on the floor of some people that Bob or Roy knew in sleeping bags, and the Stone Ponies at the record company put them up in a luxurious hotel across from this club called the Unicorn in Boston, and we were playing the bill at the same time. We used to go out after the gig and for sandwiches and burgers or whatever, you know, or breakfast or whatever, and we played a week. And towards the end of the week, I stopped sleeping on the floor of the people's apartment and started sleeping in the hotel across the street with Linda Ronstadt. And ironically, this is a weird thing. Years later, I was walking down Bleecker Street, and there was a club called the Bitter End. And this limousine pulls up in front of the Bitter End, and out of the car comes this woman in a beautiful white ermine coat or something, mink, whatever. And she stops and looks at me, and I'm walking towards her, and she's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and her entourage is getting out of the limousine, and she goes, don't I know you? You look really familiar. And I thought, God, Michael, if you say something, I can't, here's the situation, if we were alone together, I could have said, psst, remember that day of the Boston, a couple of days we were playing together, and I'm the drummer for Cat Mother, and Michael, remember me, and we called